Okay. Should we say 1 more minute, Lynn?
I think we're starting on Jewish time, a little bit late, still admitting people.
It's also Libyan time, you can triple that.
Is that in Benghazi or Tripoli?
Well, today it really, yeah, today could really be an argument. Yeah, no, it's just, perhaps it's a thing of the tropics, isn't it? You know, it's hot, people want to just slow down. And...
Yeah, they have no idea of time.
Okay, what I'll do is do the instructions and then I'll put up the slides. Let's just start now.
Okay then, everybody. I think we'll start now. Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be, and welcome to the latest of our Harif lockdown lectures. For those who don't know us, we are a small band of volunteers based in England. Our aim is to raise awareness of the history and culture of the Jews of the Middle East and North Africa. We also advocate for their rights and those of other oppressed minorities. Please do check out our website, www.harif.org, and our associated blog, Point of No Return. This evening is being live streamed to the Harif Facebook page, and a recording will be made available. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions after the talk. Just type in your question in the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to make sure that you put your question. So this evening, we are delighted to welcome our speaker, Lucky Nahum, who is a fashion designer, a businessman, and an ideator, which is a word I've never heard before, but I think it probably describes you very well, Lucky, a creative genius, really, full of ideas. So Lucky was born in Tripoli, Libya, and now lives in Rochester, New York. And Lucky has graciously accepted our invitation to talk about his family, his life in Libya, and his hair-raising escape from Tripoli in 1967. Just to give you an idea, a very, very brief history, the community of Jews numbered 38,000 in 1948, and today not a single Jew lives in Libya. Libya has an ancient Jewish history going back 2,000 years or more. In the 1920s, the country came under Italian colonial rule, and in 1938, Mussolini's racial laws were imposed. Libya became a battleground between the Nazis and the Allies during the North Africa campaign during World War II. The British took control of Tripolitania in 1943. In 1945, a terrible pogrom took place in which 130 Jews were killed. In 1948, 90% of the Jews fled for Israel. The country became independent in 1951 under the rule of King Idris, and Lucky's family was among the 6,000 who remained until 1967. So Lucky, lovely to talk to you today. Can you tell us a little of your family history in Libya?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me, and it's an honor to be able to speak to those who support Harif. So our history, as you pointed out, the history of Jews in Libya goes back over 2,000 years. However, we thought that among one of the exoduses out of Israel, that our family might have gone across North Africa and then settled in Libya. But as it turned out, we went the other way through Turkey and Europe and eventually settled in the Basque Country in northern Spain. And then, of course, when the Inquisition hit, the family split there. Some went to Northern Europe, and another branch, ours, went back across North Africa and then ended up in Libya, in Tripoli. And that is how we got there. And there we stayed. I like the fact that you said that we were among the last of the family to leave, or the Jews really to leave in '67. Some would argue whether we were smart or not, but we stayed, and there we were.
And there's this wonderful building in Tripoli. Yes, here we have it. The Nahum, Palazzo Nahum, named after your family. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
What street have you got?
The Nahum Palace.
Yeah, the Nahum Palace, or Palazzo Nahum, as the Italians would write it, as you'd see it there on the left. This belonged to the family, and it is on what is considered, it's called now Shara Istiklal, which is Independence Street. And it's the main boulevard, at least it was at the time, where everybody, all the better stores, where it was our Fifth Avenue, if you will, where all the better stores were, jewelry stores and fashion stores and the cafes. And this is where, once a week, everybody strolled in their finest clothes and saw everybody and stopped at the cafes and chatted and talked about everybody and so on. And this palace is still there, as you see it on the right-hand side, the picture on the right-hand side. And it is still called the Nahum Palace, although I believe that the government ended up taking over it. I received a call one time from somebody who has a cafe downstairs in the palace, and they asked me if I was a Nahum, and I said yes. And he says, well, I have a cafe in your palace. I said, well, yes. I said, you can send me the rent anytime.
So my question is, why are you called Lucky?
Well, Lucky, I was named after my uncle on my father's side, the oldest of the 5 children. And his name was Fortunato, which means lucky in Italian. And of course, when I came to the U.S., trying to get Americans to pronounce Fortunato was very difficult. And at that age, nobody wants to feel like, even if it's not happening, feel like they're being made fun of by mispronunciations of a name and so on and so forth. So one of the first words I learned was how to translate my name, because I didn't speak any English when I came to the U.S. And so I said, well, call me Lucky. And it stuck through school. Nobody, the teachers and the administrators never said anything. And then at 18, when I went to get my citizenship, I was 18 and, young and foolish. And I was asked by the man, if I wanted to change my name. And immediately I thought, well, yeah, because I'm Lucky. And then the guilt of the family was upon me, and I said, well, I can't get rid of the name I was given. So actually, legally, my name is Lucky Fortunato Emanuele Nahum, which has my uncle's name and my grandfather's name, and I kept everybody's names, and everyone should be happy.
Can you tell us what happened to your uncle Fortunato?
Yeah, my uncle, he was running the businesses at the time because he was the oldest, and it's a patriarchal society. So, but in the bombardments in World War II, he was helping people get into the shelters, the bomb shelters, and and people who help other people get into the bomb shelters are the last ones to get in, and so he died under the bombardments. What that created was a little bit of chaos, besides the heartbreak, of course, but the chaos came in that, my uncle, who was running the business, was no longer there, and the next three children were women, and well, women were supposed to be married off, you know, and not run businesses, I guess. And so my father was up next in line as Quintino Camus Nahum, and he's the fifth child, but the fifth child at the time was 13 years old. And when in 43, the Jewish Brigade was among the first Brits to enter Tripoli, not among, but the first to enter Tripoli. My father was the first to sign a contract with the British Armed Forces. But of course, as I said, he was 13 years old. And so in order to deceive the British that they were actually dealing with a man and not a boy, they made, you know, we all wear shorts in Libya. It's hot weather, right? So, so they custom made him long pants to put him in long boy, you know, big boy pants in order to make him look a little older. And that's, yeah. So then, and that was really his start in business. He was, you know, thrown into it at an early age.
Yeah, extraordinary. And do any members of your family have any recollections of the 1945 pogrom in Tripoli?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit at the beginning, so I missed the
Did
early,
you hear that?
the early part.
Sorry. Do any members of your family have any recollection of the pogrom that broke out in 1945?
Yeah. Absolutely. That pogrom, as I've been told, because I wasn't born yet, was an attack of the Jews in the old city, where most of them were anyway. And as it's told, the British really turned away and allowed it to happen, and it came as a surprise. And so there were many that were killed or injured. They weren't so surprised for the next one, however. For the next one, the Jews armed themselves, and in fact, when it happened again, they fought back. But again, in this case, the British, I'm sorry to tell you, Lynn, but the British, in this case, stopped the Jews as they were pushing back the Arabs beyond the walls of the old city. And there were less deaths and injuries for the second one. But I think what happened is that, you know, it was kind of written on the wall, and yes, a lot of people began to leave. I'd like to point something out, because it is often said, and I'm really mostly interested in getting things straight, because after we left and Gaddafi arrived, and history was not only rewritten, but it was erased. So when people say, but you know, we lived in peace. Well, some of us lived in peace, and some of us didn't live in peace. Well, I say, well, you know, things began going bad when, you know, Israel was formed. Well, no, because, you know, there were pogroms before, and there were problems before, and we were paying taxes to be protected before that. So we weren't treated as full citizens. We were second-class citizens. So, you know, if you say that we were living in peace, would you be willing to live that way? I don't think the alternative would be welcomed. So I don't accept that terminology. Now, that said, it needs to be clearly understood that when I speak about Libya, or anybody speaks about Libya, we're talking about a place that is very, very complicated. Because clearly I have a lot of nostalgia. I have a lot of wonderful memories, as I have bad memories. It's just that kind of place.
Mm-hmm. I think we'll go on to the next slide. Hang on, Lawrence. Yeah. So this was one
right.
of your family's businesses, wasn't it?
Well, this was you know, the one. Yeah, this was this was the wine business, which pretty much we had the monopoly on. And it's, well, you know, monopoly is a negative word, but let's keep in mind that this was a Muslim country predominantly, and, you know, alcohol was alcohol. But, you know, there was a German company who had the beer, which was hugely loved by everybody in Libya. And we had the Ruber After wine. You can see on the picture on the left, on the right-hand side of what's left of this old bottle, that there's the Hebrew written on it, depicting the kosher. And
Kasher, definite kosher.
I'm not sure
And the other bottle says Rosso d'Africa, right? So red wine from Africa.
Red of Africa, yes. And I'm not sure that because I can't quite see the bottom of this picture. The pictures are enlarged, but I know that in one of them it actually mentions the name of Clemente Nahum, which is who my grandfather was named after, because my grandfather was Clemente Nahum.
Right, and does this exist at all? As you say, it's a Muslim country. Is there any wine production going on?
If you look on the right-hand bottle,
yeah,
under Rosso d'Africa, you can see the Nahum.
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
There is no legal alcohol production in Libya currently. However, there is a favorite drink, local drink called Legbi, and of course Bucha is another drink, and they're pretty much, I jokingly refer to them as Libyan jet fuel.
Someone's just asked a question. Where were the vineyards?
Well, the vineyards, that's an interesting question. I wonder if somebody asked it, somebody who asked the question is knowledgeable of this, because the vineyards at the time were what was considered just outside of the center of the city, right? Outside of the city. However, that land then became an area called Siraj. And Siraj, for those who know it, is where the multi-million-dollar villas exist today in Tripoli. And going back a while, when the internet was, you know, happening and the revolution happened in Libya, I looked into who some of the owners were, and some in the family told me that their grandfather and his brother had bought the land, and I can assure you the family never saw a penny from it. So I don't know exactly who it was bought from, but the vineyards are now the area called Siraj, and I am told that in many of the villas, grapevines still exist.
Right, but not cultivated, obviously.
No,
yeah.
not
No.
that I know. No.
Next. We'll do next. So the next slide, I'm sure will bring back memories for you, Lucky. Can you tell us something about these pictures?
Yeah. When you asked me for some pictures, I thought of sending these because they kind of depicted in dress, and maybe because I design clothes for a living, I sort of focus on that. But you know, from the dress, you can only tell. Not only can you tell the time, but you can tell the styles as they change. You have in the middle picture, top middle picture, you have clearly a well-to-do, beautiful woman in a more European garment, right next to a woman in her traditional garment. And there was a difference in the traditional garments between the Jews and the Arabs, mainly in the colors of the textile, that you could tell the difference. But also in the lower left, you can see at a more recent party, I say recent of the time, you can see it's a black and white picture, where you had people that were dressed in, again, more modern European style clothing, and yet you still had people dressed in the traditional clothing. Now, those who made the exit from the old city to the other parts of Tripoli pretty much modernized and Italianized and started to wear more European clothing, as you can see on the upper left, upper right. And then ultimately in the 60s, middle to late 60s, the lower right picture of the 5 women who are certainly enjoying a party of some sort. This was very typical of the dress. You know, clothing was important, as I know it was in other places, in other parts of the world, but custom clothing was pretty much the way people dressed in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I had my first custom suit at the age of 8, if not earlier.
Yeah. We've got a picture of that later on.
Yeah.
Right, just, yeah, didn't Sophia Loren come and visit one year?
Sophia Loren came. Yeah, she came to make a very terrible movie, but she did come. Yeah, there was a movie that was made. I can't recall the name of it now, but I did see it not too long ago, just to be able to capture some of the scenery of the Sahara and Tripoli, and also some of it was shot in one of the 2 Roman ruins, either Sabrata or Leptis Magna. I don't recall which one, but definitely it was that part was enjoyable to see, but the movie itself was pretty weak.
Okay, next. So this picture should appear on your screen, yeah?
Oh, okay. These are Ines and Isaac Baranas. These pictures, I think, tell a story. First of all, this was the family that welcomed us when we arrived in Rochester, New York. They had left somewhere in the 50s. And all these pictures here are from Libya. And you can see in the middle picture, Ines and one of her friends dressed in all their traditional glory. Beautiful, beautiful young women. And then there they are with Isaac, which became her husband, on the left, strolling in their finest clothes. And they have both since left us. Of course, I'm friends with the children. The children live here in the US. And on the right side is the classic, you know, at the beach picture that everybody has, because you know, I argue that we have the Mediterranean in our veins, and we just love going to the beach. And you know, let's not forget, you've got about 2,000 kilometers of beaches in Libya that were they to be used properly, this could mean a lot of tourism income for Libya.
Absolutely, yeah. Actually, I remember you saying that when you actually did leave, your mother had the wisdom to pack one suitcase full of photos.
Yeah, because
so these are some of them, aren't they?
Right. Yeah. There were conditions set to our leaving, and one of them was not just us, the Nahum family, but all the other Jews. One of the conditions was that we could only take one suitcase per person. So it fell on my mom to go pack the bags, because at the time that we were going to escape, we weren't in our villa. We were hiding elsewhere. And so she went back to the villa and packed the bags. And one of the bags turned out to be all photographs. Now, you know, for the longest time, without communications on my part with the community, I didn't know whether this was a unique thing or not. But as it turns out, I think I can safely say, without speaking to each and every Libyan Jew of the 6,000 that left at that in '67, that every single family took out a suitcase full of photographs.
Yeah, and that was a very wise move in the, you know, like in retrospect, isn't it?
Yeah,
because clothes don't last. you know, you throw them away or you pass them on, but photos do last forever, and they're always a lasting memory. Yeah.
And it's certainly something that we could show the future generations.
Absolutely.
You know, while we have our memories, those, you know, you can verbalize them to our children and so on and so forth, but pictures really can tell quite a story.
And these are so glamorous and good looking, these people, you know, and they're obviously thriving in the Mediterranean climate and living life to the full. So next slide, please. So can we talk about this picture here, Lucky? What does it represent?
Well, this picture is the one on the left is the Nahum family. We're talking late 1800s here, and it's the same picture that was used on the cover, slightly filtered for art purposes, in the book of Renzi de Felice, Jews in an Arab Land. So this picture was taken in a home that was originally built for and by an Ottoman Pasha, Karamali. And eventually, of course, the Ottomans, you know, disappeared from Libya, and the Nahum family bought this. If this home has now become a museum.
Right.
And if you take the more modern pictures,
yeah,
well,
here they are.
In fact, look at the bottom left, or the bottom picture. If you were to take that picture and superimpose it onto the old picture, you could almost be right on the money, right, perfectly right on top of it, because that was the balcony where the Nahum family was hanging out for the picture. So you have, right, so the one on the upper left is of the courtyard downstairs, and then you have, well, you can see the balcony and the rooms above. This was in the old city, by the way. Yeah, it's a beautiful home, and it's, as I say, it's a museum today.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever live in it or stay in it at any point?
I don't remember it. When I was born in the old city, but down the street a bit from there. I only recently found out that I was not born in a hospital. It was a shock. I don't know why. I just naturally assumed I was born in the hospital, but I wasn't. I was born in a house that my parents had moved into and for themselves, because before they were living with the family, and but you know, at some point they got their own place, and that's where I was born. But it was down the street from here, from this one.
Right.
I think you know, it's funny, if you research this house, I have never found anything that says that Jews lived in it, other than that one picture. You know, they'll talk about the Ottoman Empire, and they'll talk about the museum, and that's it. But clearly, there's proof that it was the Nahum house. And some of the people who are now doing research in Libya, there's a beautiful woman who is interested. Her name is Hiba, and she's interested in restoring the old city, and so she does a lot of this research. So the next picture, I think you had.
Someone's asked a question.
Next
is this
picture.
the Zamit Boutique Hotel?
No, it's the Karamanli House Museum.
Sorry,
that I know. Okay, next, please. Yeah. So, can you tell us who this gentleman was, Halfala Nahum?
Right. So Halfala Nahum is the man who made the Nahum family the Nahum family. He's the second one from the right, and he was the president of the community and the patriarch of the family from the standpoint of he was the most successful and he was the man. But Halfala never married and thus never had children. He lived in a palace, and in the 60s, I believe it was 63 or 64, he was killed in a palace. Now, what happened there is he had been receiving demand notes for money, and he refused. And eventually, he was taken into his home, tied to a chair, I imagine tortured, and eventually killed. What happened was that he was, it was thought that it couldn't possibly be Arabs because he donated a lot to Arab organizations. And so the argument was, well, Arabs wouldn't do this. And so they accused the rabbi, but the rabbi, because he had some blood on his shirt, but he was a shohet. For those who don't know, he was in charge of following Jewish laws in the killing of the animals for food, and that's why he had blood on him. But soon after he was killed, other prominent Jews were approached in the same manner, that is, to have money demanded. And in fact, it was Benyamino Hassan, I believe it was. I wrote it down so that I would remember. And what happened there was that he was also attacked, and he lost an eye in the process. And the gang was eventually arrested, and it turned out to be 11 men, 10 of which were Arabs, and one was Maltese. And that's what happened.
And were they released soon after, or did they serve a prison sentence?
My knowledge is that they served a stiff sentence.
Right. So justice was done in the end.
As much as it can be done, yes.
Right. And Halfala Nahum has this reputation of being a very fair man, you know, with very good relations with the Arabs or the Muslims.
He was really a peaceful man, a wise man, and someone who understood the art of diplomacy and compromise and of living together. I say this because if one is to read about him, one can find that whoever it was that came in to rule Libya, the role he took was not necessarily to fight, but to try the best to minimize damage. It wasn't always necessarily, you know, it wasn't about colluding. It was about, look, let's talk this over. Okay, we can always fight, but we don't always have a chance to speak to each other. So that was really kind of his role. And in fact, you know, you will find that he met with Italian dignitaries, including Italo Balbo and Mussolini and the king and the Brits, of course. And yeah, I mean, he was the president of the Jewish community in Libya.
So it must have been a terrible shock when he was murdered like this.
Yeah, and again, you see, we go back to the complicated Libya. You know, we can't say that things weren't going on. You know, things were going on. Some would argue, well, but he wasn't killed because he was Jewish. He was killed because he was wealthy, perhaps. but there were other Jews who were killed for being Jewish. So we can't just wash it away. So yeah, you know, look, it was a shock, and yet it was never a surprise. When the pogroms hit, for example, the one in '67, the last one when I was there, you know, nobody went to bed the night before thinking, you know, tomorrow I'm going to be in the middle of a pogrom. No, nobody thought that. However, nobody was surprised.
Mhm.
You know, when it happened, it happened. The war broke out, the 6 Day War broke out, and all hell broke loose, you know, from Morocco all the way to the border with Egypt, and in Egypt, but Egypt was in the war, you know.
Right. Yeah, we're just coming to the next slide, which
Right, we've got
so-
4 slides on this.
yes. So please do tell us what happened in 1967. What were your memories?
Yeah, these pictures are very rare because, first of all, it's, you know, the world was different. Not everybody had a phone that was taking pictures and selfies. And certainly nobody was interested in recording this. So I was able to, these are not my pictures, but I was able to find them long ago, and they've since been picked up from my pages, social networks, and spread around. So 67, June 5th, 1967. My brother and I were home, a beautiful Libyan day, blue skies. We were having breakfast and ready to go to the beach and meet our friends. And a friend drove through our gate in the villa and told us in an alarming manner that the war had broke out, and that the Jewish stores and homes were being burned in the center of the city. Now, we lived outside of the center. We lived where the villas were. The city of Tripoli and Benghazi was predominantly built by the Italians, and it very much looks, as you can see in these pictures, like a European city. You know, the homes were apartments. And this friend had come to tell us this outside of the city, and you know, yeah, there was a little bit of a shock, but it was like, okay, now what? And soon after, my parents, having shuttered their respective businesses, came home, and they came home in a different automobiles. So what they had done was to exchange cars with friends. So in the hopes that in our exit further out of the city, that we wouldn't be recognized, but that didn't happen. The minute we hit the beach road, heading west, the roads were lined with people throwing stones, and immediately they called out our names. So that's how I knew they recognized us, and you know, and screaming, "Kill the Jews!" So so that was our ride out. But when we got to where we were going to hide, my parents realized that the house was surrounded by unknown people, and so they felt that it would be risky to stay there overnight, because chances are that they would attack at night. So we drove back to the villa, which meant we had to drive back through the people along the streets yelling and throwing stones, and at any moment they could have stopped us, but they didn't. We got to the villa, and we stayed there for a week. I'm skipping over a lot of the details because we only have an hour. So we stayed there for a week, and then I think because of the uncertainty of food, the lack of food, the deteriorating mental state, and the fear of being attacked, my parents thought it best that to use a little reverse psychology and to leave the villa and move into the fire, into the center of the city, where no one would think we were foolish enough to go hide in. And that is where we hid for the rest of the month. But
Right.
you know, by that, you know, you had already, by the time that we were heading into the city, you already had entire families who had been savagely killed, and individuals, you know, that got caught in the streets by these mobs, as you can see here. And, you know, and in some of the pictures, in fact, here, you can see that there's police there, but they're not doing anything.
Right. So the police just stood by and let the rioters run wild.
And I'm, you know, from 2020, sitting here in Rochester, New York, I'm not going to question them and say, well, why didn't you, you know, maybe they didn't feel safe, whatever. The point is that this was allowed to happen. The king wasn't strong enough to stop it. And lives changed in a heartbeat.
And I believe about 19 Jews actually died at this time.
Yeah, two of the families, because at some point the king decided that he couldn't. And by the way, King Idris was a good king. He just wasn't strong, and he decided he couldn't protect us, and so he he decided he'd open up a camp and put us all in there, and that's where he could protect us. Well, of course, you know, I don't know of too many Jews who like to hear that they're going to be placed in a camp. So, you know, we were supposed to call in to the police station and ask to be picked up. My parents did not go for it. Many others did not go for it, but some did. And the two families that were killed were in fact picked up by men in uniform and never made it to the camp. They, you know, the men were tied, the women were treated as you can imagine, and then eventually all killed.
We've had a question. Do you know the Barda family?
Yeah. I don't know if this is a good time to ask it.
Well, it's asked in connection with the pogroms.
Okay, the Barda family. Do you know them?
No, spell it.
Them? Barda.
Oh, Barda. Yeah, of course I do. Yes. Are they on? Are they somewhere watching now?
Somebody was asking.
Yeah, I do.
On their
Slide,
yeah, it may not be connected to the pogrom anyway. So tell us how you actually managed to leave Tripoli, Lucky.
Well, once we were hiding in the city center, so this is important. My mom, my brother, and myself, we had Italian passports. Now, why did we have Italian passports? Libya did not give Jews passports readily. They gave them willy-nilly whenever they felt like it, if they felt like it, depending on if the sun was shining or not and whatnot. So you do have some Libyan Jews who have Libyan passports, and you have many who do not. My father was one of them, for example. My father never had a passport, never had a citizenship until we came to the US. So he was what they call men without papers. Other Jews went and got citizenships from different countries, Italy being one of them, the obvious one, because they were colonials, the colonists in Libya, and still had big influence. Some got British citizenships, some French. In fact, the Baronesses that you saw in the earlier pictures had French citizenship. But those were only gotten because it was a form of security. So we went and got a citizenship just to say, well, they'll protect us if anything happens. But my father decided to never get a citizenship. I suppose if he wasn't going to get the Libyan one, which he was never given one. So at some point, my father said that, you know, my mom, my brother, and I should leave. And to which my mom said, because we had passports, and my mom said that that wasn't going to happen. Either we were all going to leave or we were all going to stay and die if that was going to be the end. And that's, well, we didn't die, but we all stayed. And so my parents decided to contact a nephew of the king, I don't recall his name, Mahmoud, I think was his name, and risked because, you know, there was a lot of unknown. It's not like you could watch CNN or BBC or, you know, there was a lot of unknown. You couldn't call each other. My father was sure that our phone was tapped anyway. So they called and said, you know, if he blows us in, he blows us in. But he came, he listened, and he said, well, I can't help you get out now, but as soon as I can, I'll get you the paperwork to get out. Well, eventually he returned and he said, I can get you the paperwork, but there's conditions. And some of the conditions are the same as everybody got, which was, as I mentioned earlier, a suitcase per person, 25 sterling pounds, roughly $25 per person, and also a condition that we would never return, signed that we would never return. And with that, we left. Now,
can I take you back a bit to you took refuge in that apartment block in the center of Tripoli, and you made a hair-raising escape from there, didn't you?
Yes, and I want to mention 3 names because they deserve being mentioned. There were 3 Italians, Christians, dear friends who helped us out. 2 of them are no longer with us, but we couldn't just, you know, step out of that apartment and place into danger the people that we were hiding with. So there was a plan, and part of the plan was executed by these 3 men: Salvatore Ruggero, Gianni Costanzo, and Nando Valvo. These 3 men risked not only their lives, but their families' lives, because they could have been done with just by being with us, let alone helping us. And yeah, so they devised a plan. I remember there was a Volkswagen van involved, where, you know, with a slide door, so that they would pull up to the door and we would run out of the building straight into it, and then they would drive off.
Can you go through the window?
No, they have slide doors, right, on those Volkswagen vans.
Right.
So
right.
they had opened it prior to approaching the building where we were, and they opened it and they stopped right in front of the door of the building, and we opened the door and jumped into the van, so that there was really no space to be seen between the building and the van. And it was quick. I mean, it was seconds, where the 4 of us threw the suitcases in and jumped in ourselves, and off we went. And you know, we flew out, like many did, and we were, you know, strip search, cavity searches. You know, toothpaste was squeezed out so that diamonds, had they been hidden in them, were discovered. The, you know, stuffed animals of children were cut open with a knife to make sure that money wasn't stuffed in there. And as I say, strip search and cavity search under a gun, you know, and that's how it was.
And then you took a plane to Italy?
Yeah, we took a plane to Italy and landed in Rome, which was an interesting scene. Now, you know, this is long before 9/11. So people could literally walk into an airport and go right up to a gate. And what we found out was that, well, when we landed, it was a massive, massive crowd. And the reason was that every Jew would return every day to the airport to see who would escape today. And so, yeah, so that's, but then they, you know, there were no plans. I mean, the plan was just to get out, and then what? So a Jewish organization met us, and they said, look, you're free to do whatever you want, but we have buses waiting for you outside. We have a sandwich, and here we go again. You know, we can put you in a camp. The Italian government has opened up an old World War II camp in Capua, in the city of Capua outside of Naples. And that is where we went. And, you know, it was barracks style, and it was awful. And, but my father started working right away with the organization so as to get us out as quickly as possible. And the decision was, we were offered, you know, you can go back to Libya. We don't recommend it. Some did. Some didn't make it out. Some did. Yeah, you can stay in Italy. You can always go to Israel. You can go to Canada, Australia, and the U.S. And my father said the U.S. and my mom said Israel because we had family in Israel, and her thinking was family will help us. We have nothing. And my father's thought was theoretically sound, but it didn't work at all. His idea was, if we go to Israel, I'll never recoup any of my assets, but from the U.S. I might be able to. And so the U.S. it was, and we landed with $9 at Kennedy Airport, and no assets were ever recouped. So
how did your uprooting affect your identity, would you say?
Well, you know, I left Libya when I was 11. I turned 12 in a few months that I was in Italy, and I was 12 when I came to the U.S., which is, you know, a precarious time already for kids. Also, having hit this traumatic time, you know, the maturation process speeds up, but also there's mechanisms, I think, and I'm not a psychologist. I like to play one in the movies, but I'm not a psychologist, but this is just my own understanding of it, is that my mechanism was to distance myself from just about everything, to distance myself to what had happened, to distance myself from anything Libya, to distance myself from anything Jewish. My only goal was to become American, to make it in America. And that was that. My parents did the best they could. They both went to work in factories, and, you know, they would come home tired and depressed and demoralized. But you know what? They did great. You know, at the end, we were still together. My father's no longer with us, but and they managed to put me through university. And my brother never went back to his engineering studies because I think he felt the need to help support the family. He was 17 when we landed. And we got on. And then my father, as quickly as he could, started his own business. Went from the factory to his own business, and had his own businesses until he retired.
And do you think Jews will ever go back to Libya, Lucky?
The short answer is no. Look, Libya is in a civil war now. I am 64. This picture here was the day we left to come to the U.S. That gentleman with us, by the way, is Johnny Lucas. That I don't know this for a fact, but I always suspected to be British intelligence. But he was a dear friend. Anyway, no, I don't think we'll go back. I'm 64 and I'm among the youngest of the Libyan Jews. I often hear, you know, we've got problems right now. This is not a good time to discuss the return of the Jews. And my response is, well, you know what? When was it ever a good time to discuss the rights of the Jews in an Arab country? Never seems to be right. So it's life has gone on. We all have children with lives in different parts of the world. We're not going back. If we were to go back, maybe to visit, maybe to invest, and not for business so much, but for altruistic reasons. But I just don't see it happening. Look, there's also a lot of families in Libya whose families, you know, a lot of families whose children and generations have lived very, very good lives from the money that were taken from the Jews, from the assets of the Jews. Now, they don't want us back. They fear if we go back, they would lose financially, but they also fear their legacy would be ruined because now everyone would know, where they made their money. And quite honestly, I think everybody knows anyway. But I don't see it happening. Never or ever. Those are long-term words. I just don't see it happening. And my philosophy is, with my friends from the community, is that perhaps the Libya that we should visit is the one that we keep in our hearts and in our minds. Because
if you could visit it. Yeah.
I can visit the one in my heart and in my mind all the time. But to go back, and I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back alone. I would like to go back with some people from the community to experience it together. And I certainly won't go back. This has been offered to go back with my American passport, which I think it's folly because one, it says Nahum, which is a known name, and two, it says born in Tripoli, Libya. So I mean, 2 and 2, is obvious. And the other thing that I've been told is, well, you could come here. You don't have to say you're Jewish. Well, no, I don't intend to stand in the middle of a square, town square, and scream out that I'm here and I'm Jewish. But I'm not going there to hide either. So I'm either accepted as an equal, or I can stay exactly where I am today.
Mm-hmm. And there you are in your first custom-made suit,
Yeah,
and you've never looked back. You are now a fashion designer in your own right.
I should have known. I should have known right there and then.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. We have a few questions here on the chat.
I'm going to unmute. First, I'll unmute Evelyn Habib.
Right. Evelyn?
I haven't got there yet, darling. I haven't got that fast.
I don't see Evelyn.
No, not yet, darling. Wait, let me get Yeah, Evelyn, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Should I be seeing or hearing her?
Evelyn, have you unmuted yourself?
What was her question?
I unmuted her. No, she went checking. I'll try again. Yeah, Evelyn, are you unmuted?
Yeah, I can hear something. Evelyn?
Evelyn, can you hear me?
Evelyn.
I'm
There you are.
There you are.
I'm very, very moved, Lucky, Fortunato, by your story. And very brief, I won't take over this, but I was a 22-year-old bride in Libya in 1967. I don't know if your family would know my late husband's name, Aldo Habib. They had enormous garages and all kinds of industry in Libya. I went from northwest London I married in London, went to live there, and I was there with 2-year-old twins, 18-month-old twins in the 6-Day War. My story is very similar to yours. I've spoken on quite a few occasions as well. And if you'll allow me, I'd love to be in touch with you, perhaps by email afterwards. But so many things you're saying are reminiscent of what I went through. A very naive young woman who was pushing her children along the lungomare, the seafront, on the morning of the 6-Day War. My husband sent people to say, go home, you're not safe. And I said, I'm English, what's going to happen to me? We were in our homes for 17 days, a terrified husband who'd seen the terrible pogroms, some of which I can't even describe in the past. You were a younger man. I didn't want to ask how old you were, but I hear that you were very young. And for 17 days, we looked out of our window and we looked through the shutters and we saw the Arabs screaming and shouting and burning cars and tires. and we lived next door to the American Embassy, which wasn't the best place to live. It was very scary. My husband had a Libyan passport, so he couldn't leave with me. The consul took my family to safety, and in fact, an Arab friend drove us to the airport, as you pointed out, in great danger. And I remember getting on the Alitalia plane. It was actually Shabbat, and we were quite religious, but it didn't matter because it was a saving life situation. But I just wanted to share that so many things you said and so many names you mentioned. Your Ruba Afel beer, wine, we used to drink it. So perhaps on another occasion we'll communicate.
First of all, it's a pleasure to meet you, Evelyn. And yes, of course, the Habib name is very well known. And I would love to stay in touch with you. And, you know, when you say that the things I've said were very similar to what happened to you, that's exactly the same with all of us that were there. The difference is, and I've been working on, I even took a trip with my mom a few years ago through Italy to meet with all people from there, you know, to hear the stories of the details of how, we all know that, you know, people got out, people were hiding and so on and so. We know those parts, but how did you do it? Where did you hide? So the details we're not so familiar with because we didn't have a chance to communicate, but I would love to be in touch with you, and perhaps Lynn can be the go-between.
I can,
Okay.
like Evelyn is a good friend, and I have heard her tell her story, and it's very moving and it's fantastic. And yeah, I would introduce you with pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you.
The next question comes from Odette
Maslia. Yes, yeah.
Odette.
What is Odette's question? Odette, have you unmuted?
Yes, I am here.
Odette,
Can everyone?
Go ahead.
Hello. And thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Harif. I have been following your programs quite well, and I love them. I love all your talks and bringing in this heritage back to the world and to the Jews. Thank you, Lucky. It's a beautiful display of your history and your parents' history. We grew up in Iraq, and I left at the age of 19, smuggled out as like most of us who did, and went to Israel. Both my father's family and my mother's family in the 50s, well, some of my mothers immigrated to Israel and stayed there. So it's a huge tribe, I say, as you know, in Israel and all over the world. And then we came to Canada. I have taught Hebrew for 20 years in the Hebrew schools here. I have many Canadian Ashkenazi Jewish friends as well as others. And they all love the history. Many books have been written. And one of them, of course, Lynn, is your Uprooted. Many books, thank goodness, were written about the Jews from the Middle East, but also the Iraqi Jews. So the history is there. I would also mention Martin Gilbert, Zichrono Lebracha. He also did in Ishmael's House. I recommend it as a good history book. I still remain very frustrated when I feel it. Our kids went to Jewish schools and good Jewish schools, and we all got to embrace the Ashkenazi European Jewish histories, and rightly so, except we're not visible. That in itself is not only, it's not equal, but it's so biased. Of course, when you talk to the regular Jew, wherever you see them in Israel and here, oh, well, we know about the Ethiopian and we know about this and we know about that. That is not education. That's not enough. You're gonna make it an equal footing, and we are equal footing, and not to compete with the other history. We came about before. The young Jewish person does not know that. It's a loss of history. Yes, the culture, the heritage, it's very rich and should always stay rich. In fact, Israeli culture, not known to the I would say to more the Europeans, is more Middle Eastern than European. But again, I'm not trying to make a difference here. I am only saying I feel now terrible. My kids don't feel terrible, but I feel when I look back when they went to school and they only learned, it's like in America, they're talking the same thing. I don't want to bring that subject again. It's like you send a black kid to school and he only learns about white kids. What does that tell you?
Take your point. Lucky, would you like
Thank
to
you.
comment on that? Thank you.
So thanks for the question. I totally understand what you're saying. And in part of it is, there was a Holocaust, and people zero in on that, and I get it. But when you say to people, for example, that a concentration camp, the largest in North Africa, was in Libya, called Jado, okay?
Mm.
And from Jado, they shipped Jews to Europe, to the camps in Europe. People don't know that, okay?
No.
So we let them know. But here's another thing. When we were sent to the US, this was part of what I try to forget because I was angry about it, even at 12, because while they put us here and there was one other Jewish Libyan family, okay, they spread us out. So somebody made the decision that our culture was not worth maintaining, because it's very difficult to maintain the culture when you're surrounded not by your culture. So here we were, I lost the language. Thank God I still ate the food because of my mom. And by the way, all those Ashkenazis will come to us for the food. It's okay. So I totally understand. And at the end of the day, I don't want to be better, but I want to be equal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We've had several comments from our Iraqi listeners and watchers who actually echo Odette's, Odette's experience. Leaving Iraq. It's much the same story, isn't it, as yours? Only the details are a bit different. And the next question is from Etty Geffen. I think you are Gaffin. You are unmuted.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Okay. First of all, thank you very much, Lucky. It's you brought so many memories from conversations that I had with my late mum and dad, talking about their life in Tripoli. My maternal grandfather was Liao Tabach. I don't know whether you know about him. He was quite a famous cook in Tripoli, and how very poignant that you were talking about Jado. He was in Jado. He actually escaped from Jado, and my paternal uncle, or rather my uncle on my father's side, he was also in Jado, and he was going to be taken on to Bergen-Belsen.
Right.
But his chutzpah actually saved him, because he said to them, you don't really want to take me away before you try my food. So yeah, I tell you, that really saved him.
There you go.
That really saved him. And the thing is, he lived to, about 15, 20 years ago, he actually started telling stories about how the Holocaust affected the Jews of Libya, because for many years nobody wanted to know.
No, of course not.
But he did. I mean, he passed away a few years, but yeah.
I will thank you for the question and for relating the story. If you, through Lynn, send me the information, because my mom is still with us, and I will, some of the names that escape me will not escape her. Okay?
Yeah.
So I would appreciate it.
Just to say, for those who don't know, that about 600 Jews died in Jado. They died of starvation, or they died of typhus.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
The
So
next question is from Gassan.
yes.
Yes, Hassan.
Hassan, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Lucky, thank you very much. And thank you for the organizer to letting me in this and to hear this fascinating story. I'm going to show this from my perspective, being non-Jew, I grew up in Tripoli. Currently, I live in the UK. I was born in Italy, so I had that chance to look into different cultures and different backgrounds. And for Tripoli is part of me. When I was young, we are part of that generation that we didn't really have any knowledge or understanding of what really happened to the Jews and the Italians, why they left. All we know just the propaganda. The Italians were the occupiers and Jews were, you know, the whole story of Israel, the whole propaganda in the Arab world at the time. But we didn't really take too much attention for that story. The only thing which I was recalling about the Jews in general in Tripoli is by the stories I was told by my grandfather, bless his soul. He used to be a businessman, used to do his own business with it, especially with Italy at the time. But after the Gaddafi days, he lost his, there was like a wide nationalization in the country that many people lost their properties, and then they applied socialism and all the rest of the story, and that maybe it will take 1 hour to explain it. But all I remember when we used to walk in the streets of the Quartiera Italiana, where the Tripoli Moderna, how they call it.
Modern Tripoli,
yeah. Yeah, modern Tripoli at the time, which we now, that's what defines Tripoli, what Italo Balbo has built. When we walked around, there were a lot of closed shops, and he was walking next to me, and I said, oh, that shop used to be this name, that name, and then he mentioned Jewish name, and then he mentions Italian. I was like 10 years old. And then he would say, oh, God bless the Italians and the Jews, God bless their souls. And I was like, didn't understand what he's talking about. You know, I'm brainwashed with all the propaganda and the media and TV, and nobody can really explain to you, you know, because of the environment at the time. And then I had the chance to first meet with, I didn't really meet Libyan Jews, but I had the chance to look at Jews from Morocco, from other places, and they share the same stories, at least that's what they were told from their parents about the way how they left their countries and so on and so forth. With the Facebook, the way how I understood what happened in Libya was through Raphael Lozan. Raphael Lozan, Lucky. Because with his stories in Arabic, and he started to build an audience around him to explain what happened to them, the history of the Jews, 2,000 years, we are like you. And he proved like we have a lot to share. We share more than what politics and religion divide us. And then all of a sudden, I think many of us just discovered there were a lot of horrible incidents happened in 1945 and 1976, but it's still under the cover of what happened in Palestine. Israel is always like politicized in that bit, but nobody looked at the human side of it, the personal stories. Until recently, I heard that from Lucky. We are friends on Facebook. That's how I got to know Lucky, and I started to hear that story. That part of the nostalgia about Tripoli as a cosmopolitan city, where there are different communities from different backgrounds, they live together in peace. And then whatever happened, it happened. And then we hear all these stories about mobs killing, looting, stealing, things that you'd be ashamed of. And I think from my end, what I would love to see, like some people say, that's a forgotten history that should be reminded by the new Jewish communities or the new Jewish generations. I think this is a history that should be highlighted to everyone. It's a human story. It's not about lessons should be learned. You know, now Libya is in the middle of the third civil war. Unfortunately, there is a long way to go to recover. For me personally, I always look into Tripoli like an oasis in that part that I would love to see it coming back to its glory as a place that welcomes everyone. I would love to see you, Lucky, everyone that one day can come back with open arms and not be afraid or worried to reveal your identity. You are who you are. And hopefully we can see that day very soon. I mean, this is all what I can say. Thank you very much again. And I'm
Thank
quite
you.
moved with your story.
Thank you
Hassan.
very much, Hassan. Lucky?
Hassan, thank you for your kind words. Thank you.
Okay, the next person is Raymond Levy. Now, Raymond hasn't got his camera going, so I can't show him on screen.
Yeah, Raymond
If you
Levy,
want to start
you're
your
unmuted.
video, I will put your
Thank
picture
you.
on screen.
Can you
Yeah.
hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can hear. We can't see, but we can hear.
Lucky, thank you very, very much for your presentation. I have in front of me a book called The Sephardim of Manchester, which, as you may know, is a city in the northwest of England,
Yes.
and is the only city or place in the UK with a established Sephardi community. And this book was produced about 18 years ago, and is essentially a family tree of all the Sephardi families who settled in Manchester, which of course attracted a lot of Sephardi Jews from the Middle East and from other places, because it was the center of the cotton industry and also the cotton business generally. And there were several Nahums. There are several Nahums in this book, and one of them is my paternal grandmother, whose family were hailed from both Tripoli, Libya, and from Tunis in Tunisia. And there were two branches of the family in Manchester, and I have a sneaking suspicion, therefore, that you and I, and also one or two other people who are watching right now, if they're still connected, are very distant cousins, and also somebody from Bournemouth who I met, which is a town on the south coast of England, who I met when I spent a couple of weekends there. His picture has just come up. He's called Aviran. And
Fantastic. Yes.
we have,
Yeah,
he and I have a sneaking suspicion that we met. Anyway, in this book, there is a Pinchas, there is a Halfala Nahum mentioned, who was born in 1878 or 1879, and it says killed in Tripoli in 1963.
Yes.
So of course, this is one of the gentlemen. This is the guy you mentioned.
Yes.
And his father was Pinchas Nahum, according to the family tree. And Halfala had an uncle who was very famous in Manchester because he was an extremely wealthy businessman called Ephraim Nahum, who had several children, who one of whom was called Alfonso.
Yeah.
And as you said, the family, if for want of a better expression, the Christian names, the first names that were given to the sons, were passed down through the families in a patriarchal manner. And if I remember what I was told by family correctly, the eldest son in some of these branches of the family was always called Alfonso or Halfon. And if you look in this family tree, you will also see a few, well, there's a Halford, and Halford Nahum was given an anglicized first name. He was really Halfon. He was named after somebody called Halfon. And at some stage, if you need to get your hands on this book, or we can try and arrange to fax to you or email to you the 4 or 5 Nahum pages.
I would love it. Sorry for interrupting. You know, earlier on, when I was talking about the family, that I mentioned that one branch went back up north in Europe, and one branch went to North Africa. So I think that's where the split. You're part of the branch that went north,
Right.
Right. There was a branch in Amsterdam, because if I understand correctly, what used to happen is that in these wealthy merchant families, the patriarch, if he had enough sons, would send one son, as happened in the Nahum family, to Amsterdam to run a branch there, one to Milan to run a branch of the business there, one to Manchester, and But unfortunately, I have to say that certainly the Manchester ones, unfortunately, quite a lot of them married out and some died young. And unfortunately, from such a large family, there are very few descendants in England. I have a sneaking suspicion that I have cousins in Italy who I've never met.
Well, Raymond, it's good to know that I have a cousin in Manchester.
You're still there, Raymond. Are you still in Manchester?
Yes, unfortunately, the computer I'm using doesn't have video, but I don't look at all like you.
Well, I'm delighted that Harif is bringing together long-lost relatives. And perhaps one day we'll have a talk on the Sephardim of Manchester, because that's the subject in itself.
Yeah,
but if you want to get in touch with Raymond, I'm very happy to facilitate that.
Yeah, please
Raymond,
make all these
Harif
connections. Please make all these connections. Yes, I'd love it.
Okay, that's wonderful.
And I'd love to get a hold of the book too.
I'm not sure if there are any other.
That's fine.
Oh yeah, sorry, Aviram in Bournemouth. You had a question. You're unmuted, I believe.
Yes. First of all, Lucky, thank you very much for your talk, and thank you, Raymond, for hearing your voice again. We haven't seen you for months. Like Raymond mentioned, we got shafted in the Sephardi service in Bournemouth, and the name Nahum came along. Now, Nahum, it's my mother's maiden name. And to my knowledge, there is Nahum and there is Nahum Nakucha in Libya. And I don't really know if it's all the Nahum are the same, if the Nahum Nakucha are a completely different branch. But I think, Lucky, if we are also cousins, then you've got another cousin in Bournemouth. And I would love, I don't know if you know more about that. And also, if not, yeah, I would love to be in touch with you and find out more. So
let's again, Lynn, we're putting a lot on you, but if you could connect us.
I think I'll go into the travel business, Lucky, and we'll organize a tour for you. Start in the south in Bournemouth, come and have some shakshuka with me in London, and then go up to Manchester.
Are we going to match my shakshuka with your shakshuka?
I think yours will be a lot better than mine.
I'll tell you what, my wife suggested that you make the shakshuka and I'll make the harami.
Oh, that sounds like a good deal.
Are there any more questions?
Okay. So I just want to show you this, which is an envelope which my husband collects these envelopes, and this one is from Albert Labi of Tripoli.
But it's lovely. It says Tripoli d'Afrique, so I really like that.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Oh
As opposed to Tripoli de Syrie, which would be in Lebanon.
And they've got lots of examples of this in Lynn's book, and we use lots of things like this on Lynn's talk.
So there you go. I think if there are, there's a comment more than a question here. I think from Tarek Siala. Okay, we're just putting him on now.
I'm reading. I'm reading the comment from Tarek Siala.
Hello, my baby's crying next to me. I'm sorry, so I may not be able to talk. When I lived in Tripoli, I moved there for 2 years. A friend of mine gave me his own personal tour of the city, in the old city, and he kind of showed me things that I would not. He said I would not be able to find from anyone else. He told me about the Jewish history and kind of things that Lucky had said where no one in my family had ever told me. I was born and raised in the U.S., so I didn't really have much of a history anyway of Libya. So he took me to one place. I mean, this is back in 2004. You know, my memory isn't the greatest, but he took me to, I think it was a museum or something. It was like just a small room. But he said this is where a lot of Jewish relics are being kept and held for in the future, whenever Jews can come back. But it had a lot of books that were like family tree information. There were a lot of pictures that were kept in like a treasure box, but you could call it a treasure box. And then there are tombstones, just piles and piles of tombstones that were with Star of David on it, and it was just like kept in tons of piles. I was like, wow, we're just sitting here. He was like, yeah, we're just sitting here.
Because they were also used for construction, but also just outside of the old city, there was a cemetery that was dug up, destroyed, bodies thrown into the sea, and new buildings and parking lots built on top of it.
That's terrible.
Do you have any idea what this building was then? That it had books and pictures and all sorts of things?
I could talk to my old friend who lived there. He's Christian, so he was kicked out in the last 5 years ago. They eventually just said, "You're a Christian, get out." So he had to leave and was told never to come back. I can ask him for details. I think he'd probably know, because he lived his 45 years in Libya and lived this whole time, and he could give me some more information. But I was wondering, your friend Hind was doing some development or restoration of the old city. Maybe she knew of this place, or who knows if this place even survived with everything.
I will ask, but it could also be part of the Karamali Museum. But I also wanted to add one thing that takes us outside of Tripoli. If you go south to the Nafusa Mountains, okay, the people down in Nafusa were a lot of the from the Amazigh tribe, which, by the way, were the originals in North Africa. My understanding is that they have literally homes and synagogues that are locked up, and they hold the keys and wait for the Jews to return. And this is down in Nafusa, in the Nafusa Mountains, south of Tripoli.
That's very interesting.
Okay, does anyone have any more questions?
I think we've exhausted the questions. So I think we'll close on this note.
Can I have one last observation?
Okay,
there was a Nahum family at Holland Park Synagogue where we go. Are you related?
Do you have any family in London, Lucky?
Not that I know of.
Not that you know of. Okay.
But I'm finding
some more long lost Nahums.
Yeah, I'm finding out I've got some others in Britain, so why not London?
Okay, so I think we will end the session there. Thank you so much, Lucky. I think that was absolutely fascinating and absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can't thank you enough.
Thank you. No, well, thank you for the opportunity and to tell the story and to more proof. And
yes,
everyone. So
wait, not yet. So I just want to remind everybody that we have 2 more lectures planned. From Libya, we go to Afghanistan. So I hope you'll join us on our virtual trip. If you haven't subscribed to the Harif mailing list, please do so. Just visit our website. It doesn't cost anything. It's not limited to Jews. You know, we welcome everybody to keep up to date with our activities. It just remains for me to thank Lucky again, and thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you again very shortly next week. And keep safe, keep well, and see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Azaku Baruch.
That's it.